Section 3 of Confessions, Volumes 1 and 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Confessions, Volumes 1 and 2, by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, anonymously translated. Section 3. If ever education was perfectly chaste, it was certainly that I received. My three aunts were not only of exemplary prudence, but maintained a degree of modest reserve which women have long since thought unnecessary. My father, it is true, loved pleasure, but his gallantry was rather of the last than the present century, and he never expressed his affection for any woman he regarded in terms a virgin could have blushed at. Indeed, it was impossible more attention should be paid to that regard we owe the morals of children than was uniformly observed by every one I had any concern with. An equal degree of reserve in this particular was observed at Monsieur Lambercier's, where a good maidservant was discharged for having once made use of an expression before us, which was thought to contain some degree of indelicacy. I had no precise idea of the ultimate effect of the passions, but the conception I had formed was extremely disgusting. I entertained a particular aversion for courtesans, nor could I look on a rake without a degree of disdain mingled with terror. These prejudices of education, proper in themselves to retard the first explosions of a combustible constitution, were strengthened, as I have already hinted, by the effect the first moments of sensuality produced in me; for, notwithstanding the troublesome ebullition of my blood, I was satisfied with the species of voluptuousness I had already been acquainted with, and sought no further. Thus I passed the age of puberty with a constitution extremely ardent, without knowing or even wishing for any other gratification of the passions than what Mademoiselle Lambercier had innocently given me an idea of. And when I became a man, that childish taste, instead of vanishing, only associated with the other. This folly, joined to a natural timidity, has always prevented my being very enterprising with women, so that I have passed my days in languishing in silence for those I most admired, without daring to disclose my wishes. To fall at the feet of an imperious mistress, obey her mandates, or implore pardon, were for me the most exquisite enjoyments, and the more my blood was inflamed by the efforts of a lively imagination, the more I acquired the appearance of a whining lover. It will be readily conceived that this mode of making love is not attended with a rapid progress or imminent danger to the virtue of its object. Yet, though I have few favors to boast of, I have not been excluded from enjoyment, however imaginary. Thus the senses, in concurrence with a mind equally timid and romantic, have preserved my morale chaste and feelings uncorrupted, with precisely the same inclinations, which, seconded with a moderate portion of effrontery, might have plunged me into the most unwarrantable excesses. I have made the first most difficult step in the obscure and painful maze of my confessions. We never feel so great a degree of repugnance in divulging what is really criminal as what is merely ridiculous. I am now assured of my resolution, for after what I have dared disclose, nothing can have power to deter me. The difficulty attending these acknowledgments will be readily conceived when I declare that during the whole of my life, though frequently laboring under the most violent agitation, being hurried away with the impetuosity of a passion which, when in company with those I loved, deprived me of the faculty of sight and hearing, I could never, in the course of the most unbounded familiarity, acquire sufficient resolution to declare my folly, and implore the only favor that remained to bestow. In thus investigating the first traces of my sensible existence, I find elements which, though seemingly incompatible, have united to produce a simple and uniform effect, while others, apparently the same, have, by the concurrence of certain circumstances, formed such different combinations, that it would never be imagined they had any affinity. Who would believe, for example, that one of the most vigorous springs of my soul was tempered in the identical source from whence luxury and ease mingled with my constitution and circulated in my veins? Before I quit this subject, I will add a striking instance of the different effects they produced. One day, while I was studying in a chamber contiguous to the kitchen, the maid set some of Mademoiselle Lambercier's combs to dry by the fire, and on coming to fetch them some time after, was surprised to find the teeth of one of them broken off. Who could be suspected of this mischief? No one but myself had entered the room. I was questioned, but denied having any knowledge of it. Monsieur and Mademoiselle Lambercier consult, exhort, threaten, but all to no purpose. I obstinately persist in the denial, and though this was the first time I had been detected in a confirmed falsehood, appearances were so strong that they overthrew all my protestations. This affair was thought serious. The mischief, the lie, the obstinacy were considered equally deserving of punishment, which was not now to be administered by Mademoiselle Lambercier. My uncle Bernard was written to. He arrived, and my poor cousin being charged with a crime no less serious, we were conducted to the same execution, which was inflicted with great severity. If finding a remedy in the evil itself, they had sought ever to allay my depraved desires, they could not have chosen a shorter method to accomplish their designs, and I can assure my readers I was for a long time freed from the dominion of them. As this severity could not draw from me the expected acknowledgment, which obstinacy brought on several repetitions, and reduced me to a deplorable situation, yet I was immovable, and resolutely determined to suffer death rather than submit. Force at length was obliged to yield to the diabolical infatuation of a child, for no better name was bestowed on my constancy, and I came out of this dreadful trial, torn, it is true, but triumphant. 50 years have expired since this adventure. The fear of punishment is no more. Well then, I aver in the face of heaven, I was absolutely innocent, and so far from breaking or even touching the comb, never came near the fire. It will be asked, how did this mischief happen? I can form no conception of it. I only know my own innocence. Let anyone figure to himself a character whose leading traits were docility and timidity, but haughty, ardent, and invincible in its passions. A child hitherto governed by the voice of reason, treated with mildness, equity, and complacence, who could not even support the idea of injustice, experiencing for the first time so violent an instance of it, inflicted by those he most loved and respected. What perversion of ideas! What confusion in the heart, the brain, in all my little being, intelligent and moral! Let any one, I say, if possible, imagine all this, for I am incapable of giving the least idea of what passed in my mind at that period. My reason was not sufficiently established to enable me to put myself in the place of others, and judge how much appearances condemned me. I only beheld the rigour of a dreadful chastisement, inflicted for a crime I had not committed. Yet I can truly affirm, the smart I suffered, though violent, was inconsiderable compared to what I felt from indignation, rage, and despair. My cousin, who was almost in similar circumstances, having been punished for an involuntary fault as guilty of a premeditated crime, became furious by my example. Both in the same bed, we embraced each other with convulsive transport. We were almost suffocated, and when our young hearts found sufficient relief to breathe out our indignation, we sat up in the bed, and with all our force repeated 100 times, "Carnifex! Carnifex! Carnifex! Executioner! Tormentor!" Even while I write this, I feel my pulse quicken, and should I live 100,000 years, the agitation of that moment would still be fresh in my memory. The first instance of violence and oppression is so deeply engraved on my soul, that every relative idea renews my emotion. The sentiment of indignation, which in its origin had reference only to myself, has acquired such strength, and is at present so completely detached from personal motives, that my heart is as much inflamed at the sight or relation of any act of injustice, whatever may be the object, or wheresoever it may be perpetrated, as if I was the immediate sufferer. When I read the history of a merciless tyrant, or the dark and the subtle machination of a knavish designing priest, I could on the instant set off to stab the miscreants, though I was certain to perish in the attempt. I have frequently fatigued myself by running after and stoning a cock, a cow, a dog, or any animal I saw tormenting another, only because it was conscious of possessing superior strength. This may be natural to me, and I am inclined to believe it is, though the lively impression of the first injustice I became the victim of was too long and too powerfully remembered not to have added considerable force to it. This occurrence terminated my infantine serenity. From that moment I ceased to enjoy a pure, unadulterated happiness, and on a retrospection of the pleasures of my childhood, I yet feel they ended here. We continued at Bossey some months after this event, but were like our first parents in the Garden of Eden after they had lost their innocence. In appearance our situation was the same, in effect it was totally different. Affection, respect, intimacy, confidence no longer attached the pupils to their guides. We beheld them no longer as divinities who could read the secrets of our hearts. We were less ashamed of committing faults, more afraid of being accused of them. We learned to dissemble, to rebel, to lie. All the vices common to our years began to corrupt our happy innocence, mingle with our sports, and embitter our amusements. The country itself, losing those sweet and simple charms which captivate the heart, appeared a gloomy desert, or covered with a veil that concealed its beauties. We cultivated our little gardens no more, our flowers were neglected. We no longer scratched away the mould and broke out into exclamations of delight on discovering that the grain we had sown began to shoot. We were disgusted with our situation. Our preceptors were weary of us. In a word, my uncle wrote for our return, and we left Monsieur and Mademoiselle Lambercier without feeling any regret at the separation. End of Section 3. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.